Thank you. For me, it's a great honor and a pleasure. And I say this without any rhetoric because as I'm coming from Tehran, I just landed a few hours ago after having spent the night in the plane. It's really a great pleasure. And it's a great pleasure, I must say, because it's the Council of Europe. I have a long-standing relationship with the Council of Europe. I think that the Council of Europe and its sister or its daughter institution, the Court of Human Rights, are key and core to this European identity that we are debating, or we are trying to just highlight, because it's not just debating as if the identity, there were several positions, is that we really are trying to unearth what the European identity is. So, Ambassador, thank you. Thank you. I think that the Council of Europe has been for many, many years a kind of frontier institution, just creating Europe. Frontier institution, and from the European Union, and having chaired two committees there that are key. I chaired the Legal Affairs Committee, in those days Legal Affairs and Internal Market Committee, which was a macro committee, but I also chaired a new committee that was the civil rights and internal, this was the Tampere Committee, I would say, internal Home Affairs, and I can't remember the name. Well, it was the Tampere Committee. And there I just, in the second more than in the first, but also in the first, I was able to appreciate to its value the work that, the work of éclaireur, of just enlightening the path of the new member states to join the European Union. So, Ambassador, as this is a debate among friends, I will take the liberty not to stick to the proposed the proposed title. Why? You know, I thought that the most important thing was the coming elections. Well, today, the coming European elections. Today, I think, frankly, there are other issues that are much more important and much more key for just unearthing what is this European identity that we are trying to find or to define or to highlight. So I want. And this, I do apologize for that. I do apologize also for all the cumbersome issues with my coming here from Tehran, but Iran is not an easy place to go, and I would say that schedules, agendas are only indicative, and you are there, and you are really at the mercy of what is interpreted by the other side. But here I am, and it's really a great pleasure. So why do I say that I couldn't just concentrate on the elections and see what's this idea of democratic deficit, of trust deficit, which is important. I mean, don't take me wrong, it is important, but it's not the key. Well, I think that I will address the core of what is today and who is defining the European identity. I think that we all know that the identity is defined from the outside, so how others look at us or at me. And then from the inside, how do I feel myself, who I am, or who I think I am, what do I project, what do I intend to project, what I want to project. So what we have today is that from this external idea, what we see is that who has symbolically embodied Europe today, recently? Honestly, I think that if there is the biggest symbolism of values and principles is to die for them. The only ones that have died for the blue banner with the 12 stars are the Ukrainian youth in the Maidan. So I think that we have to see what they were, why they were doing that, why they were standing by these values. Because as I say, it's important because they stood by certain values, by the values that we cherish and that we identify with, which is, you know, in the end, rule of law, human rights, just accountability, good governance, institutions, these institutions that work. But the ones that died for that were the young people in Maidan Square. And this is important. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us two things. The first is, and you know, I was going to say I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. Let's just accept that the brand Europe is European Union. When I go in the world, when I was these last days in Tehran, well, they identify me as European, not as European Union citizen or as European Union whatever, no, as European. And our message, I was part of a delegation, our message was a European message, not the message of the chair of the External Affairs Committee of the Bundestag or me or whatever. No, it was the European message. So this is the first thing that we have to understand, is that the brand Europe is European Union. Or I would really say the European economic space, because this is what people identify with Europe. It's Switzerland, it's Norway, it's the European Union. This is the first message, and I think it's an important message. You know, branding is something quite out of control, because this is, once more, is the vision of the other, how the other sees you. Where does the vision of the other put the Europe? And they put it with the flag, the blue flag, with the 12 stars. I'm well placed to know that, because when I was in government, and this is the run-up to the Iraq intervention, there were more member states that were, I would say, on an Atlanticist than those that were, that wanted to create this counter-power, counterweight, or counter something to the United States, led by France, Germany, etc. There were more on the Atlanticist vision. Yet the brand Europe, European position, was attributed to these other, to the camp of these led by France and Germany. So I could say, well, you know what? There are many more states that are on, but nobody would listen to, because the branding is something that is out of control. It's something that it comes from the outside. So this is the first message, the branding. The second message is how the symbolism, this strong symbolism of just giving your life for something. What was this something? It was our values. I mean, this is what Europe is identified with. Of course, today it's identified with these values of, as I said, rule of law, human rights, good institutions, accountability, good governance. Today, of course, we are also identified by the economic crisis. Let's be clear about that. To the extent that people forget that we are the first, by far, the first region in foreign direct investment, which is the motor of the engine of development, and I will come back later to this. But we are seen as, you know, going through these difficult economic times. And the last element is that we are seen as a bit wimpish. This idea that, you know, we follow the United States, or we don't, when we have to stand by something, and it happened in Bosnia, and I hope it won't happen in Ukraine, but this is still to be seen, and there is a big danger that because of this division, because we will be perceived as wimpish, this is where we are. So this is the external vision of the Union. And I can say that this was what I perceive these days in Iran. In Iran, it's the bright side, it's the best side, because in Iran, as we had a common position, we really mattered. The Iran negotiations, this interim, not agreement, because what happened in Geneva is just two unilateral declarations of intentions linked by a press release, because this is what it is. And this is why each one interprets in a different way the same wording. But what we are seeing in Iran is as the ones that matter, the ones that can make or break the deal. And we are, I mean, we carry on with, which is something that, unfortunately, is not the case with Ukraine, once more, at least for the moment. I was a few months ago in China, and it was the same thing, the same identification. They are the Europeans. And then they are German and Spanish and, you name it, Bulgarian or whatever. They see us like that. Now, as I said, the identity has this other area where we project, we contribute to this image. And there, what can we say about what we want to do, or what is the image that we project? Well, I think that here we are, if we think how we see ourselves, do we see ourselves as Europeans? Well, silver generation, the educated youth in Europe, I think identifies themselves first as Europeans and then Bulgarians or Germans or whatever. But that's the educated. And I think that part of it is the Erasmus, which is fantastic. And I hope that the Leonardo project, which is the sister project aimed at vocational training, that it's just as generalized or as amplified as the Erasmus is, because Erasmus has created in a part of a generation, let's be clear, not all the generation, but the best, not the best, that's a very bad, the most educated, not the best, the most educated part, the best travel part, this identity. Now, if we leave this sector, what do we see? Well, mainly, frankly, that we are old societies, that we are aging societies, that we are afraid, that we don't see a future, that we are fearful of anything, and especially of changes, and that we would like the good old times to come back. I mean, sorry, we have to acknowledge that after the crisis, nothing will be the same, that there is not a comeback to the situation ex ante. There is no comeback to that. But the truth of the matter is that the citizenry is really disoriented. If I had to identify one characteristic, I would put forward this disorientation. And this lack, when all the polls that are carried out in Europe, just respondents think that their children will live worse than what they live. And this is for the first time. This is for the first time. This is important because you cannot have a project where people think that the future will be worse than the present. This is not a project. This is not a project. So let's keep this in our mind for the continuation of this reflection. I mean, what happens when people are disoriented is that, frankly, today, I mean, it's not only in Europe that we have populists. Populists are all over the place, from Chavez and the worst class of populists to, to what we have seen in some manifestations in the Arab Spring. So it's not our exclusive. But the issue is that populism is rising, and it's not just rising in one country, it's rising all over the place with different brands, with different, different identities. But in the end, it's just this populism. And for this populism, what's the best is to say, well, you know what? They are wrong. These people that want to build this crazy thing, this behemoth of administrations, when you know that all the civil servants, all the officials of the European Commission, plus the agencies, plus everything, are just 55,000 against 50,000 for the township, I mean the Council of Paris, or Birmingham has more officials than this, 60,000. So it's just, but they say, oh, these big buildings, this big, and people listen because people are disoriented. So this is a very fertile, just situation for this populist to be listened to. They say, no, we have to go back to the good old days. You know, let's go back to the nation state. Let's repatriate competencies that are now in this crazy commission that just measures the curving of the bananas or the well-being of the animals at the zoo, or has this architect léger that doesn't allow an armchair to be brought from one place to the other because it's part of the design, and so armchairs are screwed to the floor. I mean, yeah, well, there are crazy things. Of course there are crazy things. But once more, we need to be able to convey the message that to go back to where we were, I mean, maybe it was better. I don't think so. But even if we accept that it was better, which, as I say, I don't think so, because the world has changed. So there is no way. It's not, I mean, it's not rational, not fair, not honest to say this. But this is the populist. And unfortunately, the populists are all over. We have seen how in this referendum a few days ago, Switzerland voted against the free movement of persons. We have seen the Wilders, fantastic Mrs. Le Pen saying, comparing Brussels to the Soviet Union. You know, nobody died for the Soviet Union. The people in Maidan went and died for the values of the European Union. I mean, how crazy thing. Yet, people listen to her. She's going to be, I mean, if the projections are correct, she's going to be the first force in the European Parliament elections in France. So this is crazy. But we have the De Wilders, we have the Grillini that are a different brand. We have this, this Golden Dawn. I mean, we have all over the place. I think that we have to be aware of why this, all these brands of populism have this, these results. I will just go to these results in a moment. But I just wanted to see that one thing that, honestly, I think now it's better, but that has been very damaging, the other one, very damaging for this European identity, for the populism, is the crisis. What did we see when the crisis happened? If you remember, January 2010, February 2010. I mean, the citizens of each member state turned towards their governments, not towards the Commission, not towards the Eurogroup, towards their governments, and criticized Mrs. Merkel. The fact is, if we take the reels, the TV reels of this period, in a month, we knew all the closet of Mrs. Merkel, the yellow jacket with the black pants, the blue pantsuit, all of it, because we had her every single day, many times, twice. Did we have Barroso? Well, from time to time, just 2 seconds. And then we had our presidents. In each country, the prime minister or the president of the government. Why? Because this is this reaction, a fearful reaction, disorientation, and you turn towards what's known. And then you create a scapegoat. And of course, it was the reverse. In Germany, the scapegoat were us Spaniards portrayed in a donkey, just going to the siesta, while the Germans were working. We were lazy, the Greeks were lazy, and what this created is a very dangerous narrative, conflicting narrative, that said, well, we have a problem. And one part of Europe said, this is a problem of austerity. You have to go for austerity and everything will be solved. The other part said, no, it's because the monetary union was badly thought and badly conceived, and we need to reform the institutions. There is nothing wrong with our spendthrift. Well, of course, we had to just adjust our, Spain the first, but not just Spain, Italy and France, Greece, etc. But at the same time, we had to change, we had to reform the institutions. I open here a parenthesis, because I think that we are really unfair to those that designed the euro. When we say, oh, the euro, everybody now criticizes the euro. The euro was, it's crazy. How could they make these big mistakes? You know what? The euro was conceived in the Delors Committee. The Delors Committee just was constituted in 1981 and ended in 1989. So in the world of yesterday. And then we had, yes, the new treaty was of 92, but the setting was there. And frankly, in 92, nobody imagined what the world would be in 2010. Nobody could imagine that. So I think that what we did then is just, in this Treaty of Maastricht, is use a procedure that we have used many times with great success, is to put a bridgehead and then to build around this bridgehead. This has been the way in which Europe has incrementally, or Europe, the European Union, but as I say, in this just branding, has incrementally built this common project. This time it didn't work. Why? Because the world had changed in the meantime, just between the moment the euro was conceived and the moment the euro had to be in the world. Well, I think the good news is that, it's not perfect, it's not the best, because in Spanish we would say that the characteristic, the signature of the European Union is that it's a bit chapuzas. So it's incrementalist. It's meddling through. It's just never the best option. But it works. And I think that the good news there is that contrary to what I have heard so many times, oh, the euro is going to collapse. It will collapse, and people would tell you it will collapse in 3 months, in 6 months, in a year. Well, here we are. And things are better, and we have built on the institutional side. As I say, it's not perfect, and we are not out of the woods. Let's be clear. We can go to very difficult times, but here we are, and we are going forward. So that is something that I think sets us this perception panorama ahead of the elections. And this is more or less the part of the old idea of my intervention today. And let's just, because I think this is interesting. Here we have the distribution of the current European Parliament and the estimates on the European Parliament. Well, as we all know, the European Parliament is now 766, so the majority, and you need the absolute majority to appoint the President of the European Commission, and for important decisions is 383, if I'm not wrong. So, in the old European Parliament, the EPP with 2065, with ALDE, with the Liberals, 84 and just a few more votes would get there. In the estimates, what we see is that the fringe parties are much more important. The detriment is to the EPP and to the Liberals. We had more or less the same, bit stronger socialist, but the socialist is also, has also to its left parties that are much more important. One of them is the old communist, the GUE, with 50-something. What does this mean? I think that the way I see it, of course, in Brussels, and when the parliament is here, this comes to Strasbourg, there is a kind of psychosis of just this is going to be terrible, nobody will be able to govern this parliament, this is going to be, no, frankly, no. I mean, fringes are bigger, but there is a core that yet is really, 75 to 80% of the parliament. What this parliament will have is to go back to the good practices of having agreements between the EPP and the PSC. And this I think can be looked as the glass half full, because in the last parliament, because there was a possibility to have the majority without the PSC, or the PSC with other, with the Greens or the GUE, we didn't have what Europe is about. Europe is about building between the PSE and the PPE. And I think that in this parliament we will have that. Now, give me the next slide. Now, in this slide, I hope you cannot see it very well, unfortunately it's a bit too small, but this slide is what the European Parliament is preparing. The European Parliament has launched a very interesting exercise of the cost of non-Europe. Of course, you haven't studied the studies, the reports that support these figures. The digital single market, what we don't have about the digital single market is costing us 260 billion. What we don't have about the single market for consumers and citizens, 235 billion, and so on and so forth. For me, I have gone through the reports that underline these figures. They are reasonable. They are not just far-fetched or crazy. They are reasonable. I really think that this can be argued. And the importance of this is that at the same time, this is a legislative program for the next parliament. And you know what? If we do this, it would be fantastic. It would be fantastic to have a digital single market, to finish the single market for consumers and citizens, because many times in Europe, we think that we have a single market. We don't. I mean, we don't. We have a hodgepodge of isolated areas where we have a single market, but many areas where we don't. And this, I think, it's extremely important. I won't go through all the figures, but I want to highlight that here there is a transatlantic trade agreement, TTIP. The TTIP is valued in 60 billion. I think this is another important project for the next parliament. And then we have the energy. The energy, as you see, there is a security and defense valued in 26 billion. But there is the energy. Why do I highlight the energy? Because I think that right now, today, after what has happened in Ukraine, we all understand that energy is our next frontier, that we cannot go on without building the energy market, and that we have to build it. To start with, we need to just link the southern gas pipelines and the Caspian pipelines and the Russian pipelines, just not to have many countries depending on Putin's whim of with respect to just heating or just industrial and energy security in general. There is another important thing about this, about what as I say, the idea behind this is that this will be the legislative program for the next parliament. But there is another important thing. You know what? If we launch this, I think we will keep Britain within the European Union. And I mean, today I listen to many that are very dismissive about the importance of Great Britain and the European Union. Frankly, Great Britain and the European Union is fundamental. It's not important, it's fundamental. And I'm saying this just knowing that we may have the Scottish referendum or even Catalonia. I think Catalonia will not happen, frankly, but this is me, a Spaniard, knowing the situation there. But I mean, let's see this from the outside and say, well, this is not as dramatic for the European Union as the Brexit. This would be, if we launch this program, whoever is in charge, Prime Minister Cameron or whoever is in charge in Great Britain, he can sell something concrete, something that goes in the line of what the Brits have fought to gain in competitiveness, to gain in concrete issues and in issues that are well studied in terms of their impact, their economic impact, and their impact in all areas, in all other areas. So I want, because you know, time goes by, and the problem of not having and not reading, it's that, I mean, you have to keep an eye on the time. So what is also important about these next elections? Well, if you remember when people would discuss about the democratic deficit, I don't buy the democratic deficit, by the way. I don't buy it. I think that this is the proxy presentation not to address the core problems of the Union. I mean, it's not by electing directly the head of the Commission, it's not by transforming the European Council in a kind of second chamber, it's not by having Europe-wide parties that concur to the elections. Oh, in Spain, I mean, in Galicia or, you know, in Segovia, someone voting for Schulz or for Juncker. Frankly, it's not going to change to create a big emotion. Oh, now I can vote Juncker, please, or Schulz. Not at all. So let's be clear. This is a proxy. This is manufactured by people that stay too long in offices and do not go and speak with the citizens. The citizens, what they want is a direction. What they want is to see how the Europe that we are going to build, how is it going to affect us, all of us. Why? Because as I said before, while the European Union was about, just trade of goods, because this was what it was about, or Cassis de Dijon, this was about goods moving back and forth. Nobody felt threatened, but when this is about immigration and these other areas of justice, and then there you need to have a much better explanation to buy on this project. So I think that we have to think all this, but on the European Commission, what do I think about the European Commission? Well, let's be clear. This is not me. We know that the European construction is an open-ended constitutional process. But it's a constitutional process of a very special kind, is that the subject, the protagonist of this constitutional process, is morphing, just changes. There were individuals at the beginning, you know, De Gasperi, Monet, Adenauer. These went to institutions, went to the European Commission. This European Commission, at a certain moment, it was Delors plus Mitterrand plus Kohl that launched this forward with the European Commission behind. Well, today we have to accept that we are at a moment where the leader of this process is the European Council. And I say the European Council, and this is the best, I would say, see once more, the glass half full, because the glass half empty is that today the tension is tension between member states, as we are seeing today in Ukraine, for instance. It's not tension between the institutions. The European construction was, the theoreticians of the European construction, this is the tension between the three institutions, European Parliament and the European Commission and the Council. Well, of course, the Parliament is an activist parliament. The Parliament just wants to grab power, and many of this democratic deficit approach comes from the Parliament, because the Parliament wants to be the one that votes the President of the European Commission without any suggestion of anyone, just the Parliament. And the Parliament wants to be the one that really has these overall parties, and that, you know, the European Council is not the leader, but the second chamber, you know, first chamber, second chamber. There is. This is, the European Parliament is a fascinating institution. I will say, if there were a stock exchange where you could buy future of institutions, I will buy European Parliament. I would recommend all of you to invest in European Parliament, because you know what? I mean, they are there, they go for it, and the European Parliament, I was in Washington a week ago with the Secretary General of the European Parliament. The European Parliament has an office in Washington, separated from the one of the European, with its own list. And this was a transaction, because they wanted a different office, completely different office in a different place. So this is an institution that the European Parliament, I was going to say we, because I have been for 8 years in the European Parliament, and this is an institution, I say, that is fascinating. The European Parliament powers come from the court in Luxembourg, many of them were powers given by the court of, so it has been an activist all its life, but sometimes it goes too far. I think that today we have to acknowledge that if we want to bring this process forward, what we have to avoid is that the tension is tension between the member states, and we have to accept that right now, with this state of the opinion in Europe, the leadership corresponds to the European Council. So this is where we are a bit of just in all this. But I mentioned that there are two visions. So how we see ourselves, where we are ourselves, and what is the image we project in the world? What is the image that, how do the others see us? And of course, there I have to go back to what's going on in Ukraine and the difficulties we are having in having a common position. A common position not in the technical sense, an agreed position. Are we going to just have some sanctions to the oligarchs, or the city real estate agents are going to lose too much money? And then, I mean, honestly, I was discussing with a Polish friend of mine, and I want to say that Poland is playing right now a fantastic role. I mean, you may agree and sometimes disagree, but Poland is a country that, as Spain did, and I hope will go back to it, there was this dialogue among the three or the four. And then there was, in the old days when I was in government, this was my privilege and my honor, and I inherited it. It's not that I created that. I inherited this position. Unfortunately, with the decision taken by the following governments, this was lost. But since Poland joined, Poland is playing, especially in all that has to do with the eastern frontier, is playing a key role, and it is playing a key role here. But I mean, where we are now is that I mean, France is going on with the Mirage deal. The Brits don't want to lose the real estate thing. The Germans just have too many interests with Russia, which means that in the end, we have voted. And there was a very interesting article yesterday at the Financial Times. I read it in the plane from Tehran, the Financial Times of yesterday, by Larry Summers, saying that we should be careful on not giving big figures of just the money that we are going to send, the pledging money, because many times this doesn't materialize and this creates a backlash. I think that he is right. But let's go a bit further and analyze why we are where we are, we are among friends, with a critical vision, why we are where we are in Ukraine. Honestly, in the first place, because the deal of the association agreement was negotiated with a very technical, I'm sure that extremely competent, very well grounded, but extremely technical, no political issue. This was done by directors of the European Commission. And you cannot forget about Russia. And it was bound to happen, as it had happened already with Armenia. I mean, it was bound to happen. We need to learn that beyond the technicalities, and we cannot just have a priority for these technical negotiations and leave as a secondary issue the geopolitical challenges. This was bound to happen the way it was negotiated. Now, we are where we are. Now we need political agreement and political leadership. And we need to agree on what to do. And what Ukraine is showing us is that we don't have this political position. What does this mean in the end? Is that we don't have a foreign policy strategy. The strategy, the so-called Solana strategy, this strategy was approved in 2003, and for 2003, it made sense. It was a strategy that reflected the Iraq war and this branding by part of the European Union. But if we take a look at this strategy that starts by the first sentence, Europe has never been so prosperous. So, you know what? If I have a document that is my strategy that starts with this sentence, I think I put it in a drawer under 3 or 4 keys, and I draft a new one. But in December, the European Council just came out with very disparaged and not at all ambitious conclusions in this area. And we need a strategy. We need to understand that people see us as Europe, but if we don't reply as Europe, there will be consequences, and not just for the European Union. It will be consequences for all of Europe, which means for member states as well. So I think that in this search of identity that we are doing, we need to establish, it's fundamental, in my opinion, to have a good, a new strategy. A new strategy that, of course, builds on the strategy that we had, because soft power, of course, yes, this is one of our characteristics, absolutely yes. Development assistance, yes, but with a revision. Effective multilateralism, you know what, we have to revisit that. Why? Because first, on matter of development, I mean, aid, as I said at the beginning, aid is not the fundamental driver of development today. It's foreign direct investment. It's foreign direct investment. It's 10 to 1. Foreign direct investment, 10 to 1 aid. And Europe is the first, by far, the first foreign direct investment in the world, and in the developing world. It's, just to give you an example, Ouarzazate solar plant in Morocco. Ouarzazate solar plant, as we don't have money, we pledged, the European Commission pledged 37 millions. They raised 600 millions. Why? Because it's not just that we are at the front line of the foreign direct investment in development, is that we bring credibility. If something is sponsored by the European Union, because of this idea of values, of accountability, of good governance, we bring credibility to a project. So there is a big liquidity in the world. We put 37 million, I think it was 37 million, and they raised 37 million euros, that is more or less $50 million, and they raised 600 million euros. Now, the emphasis in soft power is important, but frankly, what we have seen in Maidan Square just has to put this soft power in the place it deserves. You need soft power, yes, but we lack the hard power that just makes this soft power really credible. Now, this soft power has another dimension, is that there is no, I mean, if you read this 2003 Thessaloniki, because it was adopted in the European Council of Thessaloniki, you will see that there is a lot about new threats, terrorism and cybersecurity and all that. Okay, but you know what? What we see, what Ukraine is proving us is all threats are there. You know what, Europeans? Shake up, wake up. All threats are there. There are new threats on top of it, but don't forget all threats. And we thought that all threats were something that could occur, you know, in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, but not in Europe, not at all.